rise and fall of the Roman Empire, a journey through time. Sleep Scroll documentary series. Chapter 1. The Foundations of Rome, 1st century BCE. The story of Rome begins in the mists of myth and legend. Romulus and Remus, twins born to the princess Rhea Silvia and the god Mars, are said to have been raised by a she-wolf in the wild. They were abandoned and left to die, but fate had other plans. Romulus eventually founded Rome in 753 BCE on the Palatine Hill, the heart of the city that would grow to dominate the known world. It's here that Rome's unique legacy of resilience and expansion began. But legends, though captivating, leave out the raw realities of survival. The real origins of Rome come from practical, even brutal, struggles. Early Romans faced a harsh world. From the very beginning, they were surrounded by powerful neighbors, from the Etruscans in the north to the Sabines in the east. The early Romans were not content to merely survive. They sought power and dominion over their surrounding regions. Over time, the strategic location of Rome on the Tiber River, coupled with the hills that offered protection, gave it an edge that would later allow it to expand. Early struggles and wars. The first centuries of Rome's existence were filled with warfare. Whether it was the Sabine Wars, during which Rome abducted women to bolster its population, or the wars against the Etruscans, these early conflicts were necessary for survival. But it wasn't only military might that enabled Rome to thrive. It was the Romans' ability to forge lasting alliances. For example, early Roman expansion was also built on strategic marriages and treaties, which allowed them to absorb neighboring tribes rather than simply destroy them. Power and expansion. The foundation of Rome, built on both myth and military conquest, brings us to one of the core questions of civilization. Does greatness come from brute force or from vision and diplomacy? Rome's early years were shaped by the belief that survival and power required both. The Romans, for all their martial glory, were also philosophers at heart. The ideal of virtues, virtue, and pietas, duty, was central to their mindset. These virtues would later form the backbone of their political and military systems. Yet, even in these early years, Rome was already walking a fine line between idealism and pragmatism, often leaning into the latter. Chapter 2. The Roman Republic, 509 BCE, 27 BCE. By 509 BCE, Rome officially became a republic, a new political system in the Mediterranean world. The Romans rejected the idea of monarchy, creating instead a system of shared power. This early republic was governed by elected officials and a senate composed of aristocratic patricians. Yet the system, while novel, was not without its flaws. Rome's republican system allowed for the representation of the people through elected magistrates, but power was often concentrated in the hands of the wealthy elite. The plebeians, or common folk, were frequently sidelined, and their dissatisfaction led to a long-standing political struggle, the struggle of the orders. The plebeians demanded more rights, and after decades of protests and negotiations, they secured the right to elect their own tribunes to represent their interests in the Senate. The conflict between the orders. This political struggle came to a head with the work of the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius. In the 2nd century BCE, they sought to redistribute land to the poor, and implement more equitable social policies. Their radical reforms, aimed at alleviating the suffering of the poor and weakening the grip of the patricians, caused uproar within the Senate. Tiberius was murdered by the Senate, and Gaius, who continued his brother's legacy, was also killed in a violent confrontation. Their deaths marked the beginning of the end for the Republic. Rome's expansion continued during the Republic, with victories in the Punic Wars against Carthage and the annexation of Greece, Spain, and North Africa. But the growth of Roman power came with its own problems. The Roman army, once composed of citizen soldiers, began to rely more and more on mercenaries and professional soldiers. These men, now loyal to their generals rather than the state, would later contribute to the fall of the Republic. Power and corruption. The rise of the Gracchi brothers and their tragic end underscores the tensions at the heart of the Roman Republic, a system that, while idealistic in theory, was vulnerable to corruption and abuse of power. The Romans believed deeply in the value of civic duty, but over time, their idealism was overwhelmed by the realities of political life. The Republic's failure reminds us that no political system, no matter how well-intentioned, can endure without vigilance against corruption. Chapter 3. Julius Caesar, from General to Dictator, 49 BCE. By the time Julius Caesar came to power, the Roman Republic was in crisis. The Senate, once the pinnacle of Roman governance, had become a battleground for corrupt factions, and the rise of powerful generals created a military state. Julius Caesar, a man of unparalleled ambition and military genius, understood the fragility of Rome's republican system. In 49 BCE, Caesar famously crossed the Rubicon River, uttering the words, "The die is cast," and marched his army toward Rome. This act of defiance against the Senate was both a political maneuver and a personal gamble. Caesar's victory in the civil war that followed led him to become the most powerful man in Rome, but his reign would be short-lived. Caesar's rise and assassination. Caesar's rise to power was swift and bloody. His conquest of Gaul had made him a hero to the people, but a threat to the Senate. After crossing the Rubicon, Caesar defeated Pompey and declared himself dictator for life. His reforms, which included land redistribution, the reorganization of the Senate, and the extension of Roman citizenship to many provinces, were immensely popular. But his enemies in the Senate saw him as a tyrant, and in 44 BCE, he was assassinated by a group of senators, including his once loyal friend, Brutus. Caesar's death, though intended to restore the Republic, only deepened the chaos, leading to another round of civil wars. His adopted son, Octavian, later Augustus, would ultimately rise from the ashes of this conflict to become the first emperor of Rome. The end of the Republic. Caesar's assassination begs the question: was his ambition the final blow to the Roman Republic, or was it merely a symptom of a republic already in decline? In Caesar, we see a reflection of the Roman people's desires for stability and reform. Yet we also see the dangers of unchecked power. Caesar's death highlights the eternal struggle between leadership and tyranny. When does ambition for the greater good cross the line into authoritarianism? Chapter 4. Augustus in the dawn of the Roman Empire, 27 BCE. After the chaotic years following Caesar's death, Rome found a new leader in Augustus, the adopted son of Julius Caesar. Augustus's rise to power came after a brutal civil war that pitted him against Mark Antony, Cleopatra, and others. After emerging victorious, Augustus assumed control of the Roman world. Augustus's reforms and vision. Augustus was not just a military leader, he was a master of political maneuvering. He carefully shaped his public image as the savior of Rome, restoring peace after years of civil strife. He cleverly kept the appearance of republican values, even as he held absolute power. Augustus reformed the tax system, established a standing army, and created a system of provincial governance that strengthened Roman control. One of his most significant reforms was the establishment of the Pax Romana, a period of unprecedented peace and prosperity that lasted for over 200 years. Augustus also undertook vast building projects, including the construction of roads, temples, and the restoration of the city of Rome itself. Under Augustus, the empire flourished in ways it never had before. Empire and peace. Augustus's reign highlights the paradox at the heart of empire. Peace is often built on the foundation of military power. Augustus was a man who understood that to secure peace, you must sometimes use force. His reign raised important philosophical questions. Does an empire built on military dominance truly offer peace? Or does it simply shift the balance of power from one form of violence to another? The Pax Romana might have brought prosperity, but at what moral cost? Chapter 5. The Golden Age, the Five Good Emperors, 96 to 180 CE. The period from 96 CE to 180 CE is often referred to as the Age of the Five Good Emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. Under their leadership, the empire reached its greatest territorial extent, stretching from Britain to Mesopotamia and to North Africa. The achievements of the five emperors. Each of the five good emperors left a distinct mark on Rome. Trajan expanded the empire to its maximum size, conquering Dacia and bringing wealth into Rome. Hadrian, Trajan's successor, consolidated these gains, fortifying the empire's borders and constructing Hadrian's Wall in Britain to protect against barbarian incursions. Antoninus Pius maintained stability and prosperity, and Marcus Aurelius, known as the Philosopher King, fought against invasions while writing his Meditations, a timeless work of Stoic philosophy. The nature of good governance. The reigns of these emperors were marked by a commitment to public welfare and peace, yet their power was absolute. This period raises profound questions about leadership. What makes a good ruler? Is it wisdom, military strength, or the ability to maintain peace? The five good emperors provide a model of what good governance can look like in an empire. Yet, their reigns also highlight the dangers of absolute power. Even benevolent rulers can only delay the inevitable forces of decline. Chapter 6. The Decline and Crisis of the Roman Empire, 235 to 284 CE. By the 3rd century, the Roman Empire began to unravel. The crisis of the 3rd century saw a succession of weak emperors, military instability, and economic decline. The empire was beset by civil wars, barbarian invasions, and internal corruption. At its peak, Rome ruled over an enormous territory, but its vastness was also its weakness. The empire became too large to govern effectively, and its military, once the backbone of Roman power, became increasingly unreliable. The reign of Gallienus. One emperor who personified this chaos was Gallienus. His reign saw the empire under constant threat from external invaders and internal revolts. Gallienus fought against the Germanic tribes that threatened the Rhine and Danube frontiers, while also dealing with a breakaway Gallic empire in the west. Though he achieved some military successes, Gallienus was eventually assassinated, and his death marked another tragic chapter in the empire's decline. The failure of leadership. The crisis of the 3rd century raises a critical philosophical question. What happens when leadership fails to adapt to changing circumstances? The empire's internal collapse, combined with external pressure, shows that even the greatest empires are vulnerable to disintegration. Rome's problems in the 3rd century echo the tensions seen in earlier phases of the empire. The clash between personal ambition and collective stability, the burden of managing a vast empire, and the inability to adapt to new realities. Chapter 7. Diocletian and Constantine, Reforms and Division, 284 to 337 CE. The empire was saved from total collapse by Diocletian, who became emperor in 284 CE. Recognizing that the empire had grown too large, Diocletian divided it into two halves, the Eastern and Western Roman empires, each with its own emperor. This division, though practical, also foreshadowed the eventual split of the empire. Constantine, the first Christian emperor, reunified the empire and moved its capital to the east, founding Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. Constantine's reign is marked by the legalization of Christianity, which would reshape the empire and the world forever. Constantine's conversion. Constantine's conversion to Christianity was one of the most pivotal moments in Roman history. In 312 CE, on the eve of the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine reportedly had a vision of a Christian cross in the sky and heard the words, "In this sign, you shall conquer." His victory in battle solidified his power, and Constantine embraced Christianity as the official religion of the empire. His reign marked the beginning of a new era. Religion and power. Constantine's embrace of Christianity prompts a deep philosophical inquiry. How does faith influence political power? Constantine's reign asks whether religion can be used as a tool for political stability, or whether it fundamentally changes the nature of a civilization. His conversion forced the empire and the world into a new religious and cultural paradigm. Chapter 8. The Fall of the Western Roman Empire, 476 CE. By the mid-5th century, the Western Roman Empire was no longer the powerful force it once had been. The military, weakened by internal strife and external pressure, was no longer able to defend Rome's borders. The Visigoths, led by Alaric, sacked Rome in 410 CE, a symbolic blow to the empire's prestige. In 476 CE, the last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, marking the official end of the Western Roman Empire. Romulus Augustulus. Romulus Augustulus, only a teenager when he became emperor, was a powerless figurehead in a collapsing empire. His deposition by Odoacer, a Germanic general, symbolizes the transfer of power. The end of an era. The fall of the Western Roman Empire is a profound reflection on the impermanence of power. Even the mightiest empires eventually crumble under the weight of time, corruption, and external forces. The fall of Rome forces us to confront the cyclical nature of history. Empires rise, flourish, and fall. What can we learn from this inevitable decline? Can we prevent it from happening to the systems we have built today? Chapter 9. The Byzantine Legacy. The Eastern Roman Empire. 330 CE, 1453 CE. Though the Western Roman Empire fell, the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, endured for nearly 1,000 more years. Constantine's establishment of Constantinople as the capital of the Eastern Empire ensured that Roman traditions would survive, even as the world around it changed. The fall of Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire, though resilient, ultimately fell to the Ottomans in 1453. The last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos, died defending his city during the siege. His death marks the final end of the Roman Empire, but the ideas and institutions of Rome lived on through the Byzantine Empire. Legacy beyond collapse. The fall of Constantinople illustrates that the legacy of empires is not always bound to their territorial existence. The ideas, philosophies, and institutions of Rome continued to influence the world for centuries. The Byzantine Empire's ability to preserve Roman heritage, even as it transformed, reminds us that the spirit of empire, like the spirit of human progress, endures even in the face of physical destruction. Chapter 10. Roman Society and Culture, the Heart of the Empire. One of the most enduring legacies of Rome is its cultural influence. From the architectural marvels of the Colosseum to the Roman baths, the impact of Roman society can still be seen in our cities today. But Roman culture was far more than just grand buildings. It was a way of life, built on values, public spectacle, and philosophical thought. Daily life in ancient Rome. Life in Rome could be both glamorous and brutal. At its height, the city of Rome was home to over 1 million people, making it one of the largest cities in the ancient world. The plebs, or common people, lived in insulae, apartment buildings often built with cheap materials and lacking basic amenities. In contrast, the elite lived in lavish villas, adorned with mosaics and fine art. Slavery was also a core part of Roman society, with slaves performing most of the manual labor that kept the empire running. Yet, amid the inequality, Roman society was rich with public entertainment, most famously, the gladiatorial games in the Colosseum. These violent spectacles, though often criticized for their brutality, were deeply woven into Roman culture and political life, offering the plebeians both entertainment and a way for emperors to maintain their popularity. The spectacle of power. The Roman fascination with spectacle, from gladiators to public executions, raises important questions about the role of entertainment in society. How does a culture that thrives on violence and excess also cultivate great thinkers and engineers? The tension between spectacle and intellect, embodied in the contrast between the Colosseum and the philosophers of the Roman Empire, speaks to the complexity of Roman identity. Chapter 11. Roman Military, the Backbone of the Empire. The Roman military was the most formidable fighting force the world had ever seen. It was the bedrock upon which Rome's territorial expansion rested. A combination of discipline, advanced training, and innovative tactics allowed Rome to conquer vast swathes of the known world. But the army was not just a force of conquest, it was a vital part of Roman life. The legions on the march. Roman soldiers, known as legionaries, were highly trained and held in high regard. They fought not only to expand the empire, but to secure Rome's borders and ensure stability. The legionaries were given land upon retirement, a reward for their service, which helped maintain loyalty to Rome. The Roman legions were also known for their organizational efficiency. Every soldier knew his place, every legion knew its role, and the Roman army's cohesion made it nearly invincible for centuries. One of the most iconic moments in Roman military history occurred in 9 CE during the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. Led by the Germanic chief Arminius, the Germanic tribes ambushed and destroyed 3 Roman legions. This defeat shocked Rome and marked the end of its expansion into Germany. The cost of empire. The Roman army's success raises the question, what is the cost of expansion? The legions were not just the means of securing the empire's power. They were the face of its conquest. How does an empire reconcile the need for military expansion with the human cost of war? Rome's military power was the source of its strength, but also a reminder of the endless cycle of conquest and conflict that defines imperial ambition. Chapter 12. Roman Engineering, Building an Empire. Roman engineering was a marvel of the ancient world, and it is no exaggeration to say that without it, the Roman Empire might never have achieved the vastness and durability it did. Romans were innovators, turning the needs of empire into feats of engineering that would serve the empire for centuries. Roads, aqueducts, and concrete. The Romans are best known for their roads, which were built to connect the farthest reaches of the empire. These roads were not only military highways, but also trade routes, helping to integrate the empire. The Via Appia, one of the earliest roads, stretched from Rome to the southern tip of Italy, and it was the start of a vast network of roads that would cover the empire. Aqueducts were another Roman achievement that transformed the way cities were built. With the ability to bring fresh water into urban areas, the Romans were able to support large populations in cities like Rome itself, where more than 1 million people lived at its peak. Roman concrete, known as opus caementitium, was a revolutionary material that allowed for the construction of some of the most iconic structures in history, such as the Pantheon and the Colosseum. These engineering marvels were not only symbols of Roman power, but also practical solutions to the challenges of governing a vast empire. Innovation and power. Roman engineering raises a profound question about the relationship between innovation and power. How does innovation enable an empire to flourish? The Romans didn't just build for military conquest. They built to sustain and enrich their people. Their legacy of engineering reminds us that progress is often the product of necessity, and that the physical structures we build are a reflection of our political and cultural priorities. Chapter 13. The Decline of the Roman Empire. Philosophers of the Fall. 200 to 476 CE. As the empire began to show signs of strain, its internal problems intensified.
The Roman philosophers who had once shaped the empire's ethos now watched as their world faltered. Stoicism, once embraced by emperors like Marcus Aurelius, offered a framework for resilience, but as the empire faced increasing threats from within and outside, even the most stoic philosophers couldn't ignore the empire's inevitable decline.
The last Roman philosophers. The philosopher Boethius, writing during the fall of the Western Roman Empire, provided an intellectual voice for the chaos around him. In his work, The Consolation of Philosophy, he reflected on the fragility of fortune and the nature of happiness. Boethius, who was imprisoned and executed by the Ostrogothic king Theodoric, lived through the collapse of the Western Empire and saw the rise of barbarian kingdoms. In the East, philosophers like Proclus in Constantinople tried to preserve the ancient knowledge of Rome, even as the empire itself was under siege. Yet, despite their efforts, the empire was falling apart.
The fall in the mind.
The writings of philosophers like Boethius during this time challenge us to think about the collapse of empires not just in terms of political or military failure, but as a philosophical event. What happens to the intellectual and moral fabric of a civilization as it declines? How does a society's belief system shift as its empire crumbles? Rome's decline forces us to reflect on the importance of values and philosophy in sustaining the vitality of a civilization. Chapter 14. The Rise of Christianity, the Shift in Power, 312 CE. The rise of Christianity was one of the most transformative events in the history of Rome. From a persecuted minority in the early days, Christians came to dominate the cultural and spiritual landscape of the empire. The conversion of Emperor Constantine in 312 CE marked the beginning of a new era, not just for Rome, but for the entire Western world. Constantine's conversion.
Constantine's embrace of Christianity is one of the most pivotal moments in Roman history. As a general preparing for battle, he had a vision of a Christian symbol, a cross, and believed it would bring him victory. He adopted the Christian faith, and his subsequent victory in the Battle of the Milvian Bridge led to his ascension as emperor.
Constantine's decision to make Christianity the state religion forever altered the course of Roman history. The Edict of Milan, issued in 313 CE, legalized Christianity and allowed it to flourish. The Church soon became a dominant force, while Roman paganism began to fade. Faith and power. Constantine's conversion raises the complex question of how religion and power intersect. Constantine's adoption of Christianity as a state religion was not simply a spiritual transformation. It was also a political one. Christianity, with its universal message of peace and salvation, had a profound impact on the Roman Empire. But this shift also marked the decline of the old Roman gods, the civic religion that had been integral to Rome's identity. Is it possible for a society to fully embrace a new religion without losing its sense of identity? Chapter 15. The Fall of the Western Roman Empire, the End of an Era, 476 CE.
In 476 CE, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire, Romulus Augustus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. This marked the formal end of the Western Roman Empire, though the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, would continue for nearly another 1,000 years.
The fall of Rome is not the end of its story. The legacy of Rome, through its laws, culture, and ideas, lived on, influencing the future of Europe and the development of modern civilization. The end of Rome. The fall of the Western Roman Empire forces us to consider the nature of history. Civilizations are born, they grow, they reach their peak, and they eventually fade. What remains after the fall of an empire? The Roman Empire's fall invites us to reflect on the impermanence of all human achievements. It also asks us how we can learn from the rise and fall of past empires to shape the future of our own world. The rise and fall of the Roman Empire, a journey through time. Thank you for watching Sleep Scroll.